体を生贄に捧げ。
2体の生贄だと。
今こそその姿を現せ。ブルーアイズホワイトドラゴン。
The most infamous Yu-Gi-Oh monster of all time, Blue Eyes White Dragon. While clearly it's a beloved fan favorite card from a fan favorite duelist, Seto Kaiba, what you may not know is with legacy support over time, a few cards really shined above the rest and rose Blue Eyes White Dragon to be not only tier 1, but the most represented deck in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a few things to keep in mind when going over Blue Eye's success. The first is what made the deck have an advantage over the other top tier strategies at the time, that being Blue Eye Spirit Dragon. This level 9 synchro has 3 key effects. The first one is it can negate an effect activated in the graveyard. The second is that it disables both players from being able to special summon 2 or more monsters at once. And finally, this card is able to, during either player's turn, tribute itself and special summon a Light Dragon Synchro monster from the extra deck that will be destroyed during that turn's end phase. Clearly, a lot is happening in one package. This card is good against graveyard decks because of the negation effect, but it's also being able to tribute itself and summon cards like Azure Eyes White Dragon for powerful follow-ups on the next turn, and Black Rose Moonlight Dragon for even more disruption capability. Makes this card an incredibly versatile synchro monster that can be effective in a variety of matchups. The fact that it quick effect tributes itself specifically also makes it even harder to deal with, because especially following this, you can tag into an Azure Eyes and protect your entire field from card effects. The floodgate-like effect of this card, however, is something I will need to highlight in a little bit. This synchro is now the core focus of the deck, along with the seemingly easy addition of rank 8 monsters. Here's the problem with all of these win conditions, however. Sure, Spirit Dragon is a very powerful card, but how do we consistently access it in a deck full of high-level monsters? Surely we're not going to tribute summon it, right? Well, fortunately we don't have to, as the card that tied the strategy's consistency all together is known as Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon. This card is integral to any Blue Eyes deck. It's essentially a Blue Eyes level 8 that can special summon itself by revealing a normal Blue Eyes White Dragon. And while this card is on the field, you can destroy a face-up monster on the field in exchange for it not being able to attack for the rest of the turn. Everything from a card design perspective with this card is amazing. Not only with it acting as a reason to be adding and searching OG Blue Eyes, whereas prior it could be considered as more of a brick, but it greatly increases the consistency of the deck by having a very easily accessible special summon for the deck that can also act as removal without needing to attack with it. This card was essential for a Blue Eyes deck to even be remotely playable, but with the added consistency and power this card provides for the theme, in addition to the amazing win condition of Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, this deck was set up to be really strong, along with other important cards like the level 1 tuner Sage with Eyes of Blue. This tuner is definitely the best one you can play, with the ability to pitch it and send a face-up monster in order to special summon Blue Eyes White Dragon from the main deck, but it additionally acts as an amazing normal summon to search any level 1 light spellcaster tuner. This may not seem that crazy at first, but with Effect Veiler being an eligible target, this automatically made Sage that much better. These 3 cards combined with the rest of the deck being full of dump cards for level 8s to be revived with reborn spells, draw power, and more, this deck quickly became something on everybody's mind. There's a catch to all of these great cards, however, and that is the rest of the meta. When looking at the meta before Blue Eyes was playable after the 2016 Mega Packs released on July 22nd, 2016, the meta was pretty straightforward. Both Extra Deck and Domain Monarchs were the most represented deck and arguably the best deck in a field, also consisting of Burning Abyss, Cosmo, and Pendulum. What is important to highlight is that Blue Eyes had a terrible Monarch matchup because Erebus could non-target shuffle any card you control in the hand or in the graveyard to the deck, meaning Erebus completely counters Blue Eye Spirit Dragon. Additionally, because Erebus is going to send 2 spells and traps from the deck, in order to do this, it was just too much value for Blue Eyes to deal with, and if Monarch stayed in the metagame, Blue Eyes would not be able to compete. There's an argument to be made that Blue Eyes just would not be able to compete in this metagame, even with a favorable Burning Abyss matchup and potentially Pendulum and Cosmo matchups. And technically we will never know if that's the case because of the release of the August 31st, 2016 ban list. This ban list hit the 4 aforementioned top tier strategies in some way to the point where they all were not consistent meta decks anymore. Monarch was too inconsistent, Burning Abyss was still playable enough to the point of being the 4th most represented deck, but as mentioned could struggle with Blue Eyes at times, Cosmos was just not good enough anymore, and the current Pendulum decks completely changed their strategies to both Metal Foes and Magispector. I'm going to stop here for a second because this changed specifically. Pendulum shifting from generic Pendulum strategies to both Metal Foes and Magispectors is what needs to be highlighted, as the rise of these two decks in specific is what enabled Blue Eyes to become the most represented deck. See, while Burning Abyss could have a rough Blue Eyes matchup, Pendulum decks are inherently not going to like dealing with Blue Eyes because of Spirit Dragon. This is also the point where I need to highlight the floodgate effect of Spirit Dragon, as specifically here is where Spirit Dragon truly shines. Pendulum as a mechanic was insane in Master Rule 3 because you could constantly summon back 2 or more monsters every single turn at once in order to keep going into more extra deck plays and eventually win the game. What Spirit Dragon does, however, is fundamentally counter the Pendulum strategy's greatest strength, which is being able to summon back 2 or more Pendulum monsters every turn for more extra deck plays. Because of the aforementioned Blue Eyes alternative White Dragon's release as well, clearly the deck can access Spirit Dragon consistently, giving it a great position in a meta full of Pendulum decks. Blue Eyes' worst matchup was definitely Monarchs, again as stated before, with Erebus hard countering Seto Kaiba's infamous strategy quite easily. And instead, the metagame evolved to the most preferable climate this deck could have received, and this shift is what enabled Blue Eyes to thrive. This was also at a point where Metal Foes did not have Mithrilium to out a Spirit Dragon more consistently. It is important to point out 2 things about Blue Eyes' short-lived success as the most represented tier 1 deck, however. The first important thing to know is that Blue Eyes' success was very short-lived, with its rise only occurring because the 2 other best decks were both Pendulum strategies, and the 4th best deck was a Graveyard deck that had a terrible Blue Eyes matchup. It was only bound to be short-lived, and any non-Pendulum tier 1 strategy, or any tier 1 deck that was not as Graveyard reliant as Burning Abyss, could make Blue Eyes obsolete. And sure enough, this was the case, with the irony of the second tier 1 deck also being a Kaiba-based strategy in the form of the ABC deck. ABC had one of the most insane boss monsters ever printed at this point in the form of ABC Dragon Buster, a card that single-handedly power creeped Blue Eyes to oblivion and numerous other strategies. This is not even mentioning the added addition of Paleozoic into the meta later on, along with incredible support for Metal Foes to make it maintain its tier 1 status. The second problem with Blue Eyes at this time was while it was the most represented deck, it also didn't win events, and that spot was instead taken by Metal Foes. Metal Foes was just arguably a better deck, with so much more consistency and an insane grind game even through Spirit Dragon with cards like Metal Foes combination. While technically yes, Blue Eyes was tier 1 at this time, most clearly shown through YCS Minneapolis, with it being the most represented deck with 8 out of the top 32 spots taken by it did not necessarily make it amazing, and arguably was only meta because of the specific circumstance that came up. Considering how Legacy Archetype support isn't generally that great, for this deck to somehow utilize the support enough to be tier 1, even if it's arguably a pure coincidence, is incredible. There's so much irony in all of this as well. For example, with ABC power creeping another Kaiba strategy, and arguably the most poetic being how Pendulum, a mechanic that was powerful enough to get old players to quit the game, was hard countered by the oldest deck in the books, Blue Eyes White Dragon. Feel free to subscribe to my channel for more content like this one, and join my Discord to stay up to date with everything involving myself, along with being a part of an awesome community. The link is in the description.